Hi Eric, my name's Jack Likins. I've been abalone diving in California for over 50 years now, started back in the 50s. And I've watched the resource in Southern California dwindle and moved finally to Northern California basically so I could do abalone diving. Plus it's a beautiful place to live here where the redwoods meet the ocean. Anyway, you asked me to give some tips on trophy hunting. And I think the first tip that I'll give is that not necessarily the best diver is always the one who gets the biggest abalone. There is a certain amount of luck associated with it. However, I always tell people the better you are, the luckier you are. But in any case, my point really is I think the best trophy hunters end up being those divers who spend the most time in the water and the most time on the bottom of the ocean. When you do that, you also learn abalone habitat, where to look at for them, the good places to go where the big ones are, and you do spend an awful lot of time exploring. I dive many hours without ever taking an abalone, just looking for new areas. I love to explore, and I guess that's one of the reasons I like abalone diving. It's somewhat like a huge Easter egg hunt, so to speak. You're always looking for the egg, the bigger one. And the other thing about abalone diving, I think, trophy hunting particularly, is that I've found a lot of times you don't find the biggest abalone in the areas where the abalone populations are the most dense. There are a lot of places north of San Francisco where you can go and see 8.5-inch abalone piled on top of each other. But those aren't necessarily always the places where you're going to find the biggest abalone. I've found that mostly you'll find them in areas where you might look for a few minutes, 15-20 minutes, and never see an abalone. I've dived in places where I haven't seen one for hours, and then finally you would see one and it would be a big one. You've got to know where to look. I find mostly the bigger ones are in protected areas, protected from the rough ocean when they get up to 20 feet high. Not necessarily in deep water. A lot of them are in shallow water, and by shallow I mean 10 to 15 feet. Probably most of the trophy abalone I've taken are in 10 to 15 feet of water. And they're mostly upside down in a protected area, and also an area where food circulation would be good for them. That would be kelp that breaks loose during storms, or kelp that they can get to without having to move too far. I find that larger abalone don't move much. I've been back year after year and seen the same abalones in the same holes year after year. So my conclusion from that is that they don't move around too much. And if you can find one, it's really a thrilling thing. And it's a thrill when you see a huge one and you've got your 10-inch gauge and you measure them. Sometimes your eyeball gets miscalculated if you're diving with other abalone and they're all around 9, 8.5, 9, 9.5. Pretty soon you see one that's 9 3/4 and you think he's 10.5, and you put your gauge on him and you find out no, he's not really 10 even. But when you do finally see one, usually it's fairly obvious. They look so much bigger because they're usually deeper and wider and of course longer, but not always. You know, sometimes we have what we call the streakers. They'll be flat and long, not very wide, not very deep, but they'll be streakers, and those are sometimes deceptive. Those are the kind of ones that you need your 10-inch gauge carrying it with you on the bottom to measure. The other thing that really helps trophy diving is to dive with a dive line, so that you can drop your abalone iron, mark the abalone, go back to the surface, think about how you're going to approach him, maybe go back down and get a better measurement on him, make sure that he is 10 inches before you pop him off, and then You might even take 2 or 3 dives to go down there and size the situation up. You have to be careful, of course, because even a shadow will cause an abalone to start to run. And by that I mean he'll start to move back in his hole or clamp down onto the rock if he can't move back, making it more difficult to get him off. So you've got to be cautious, but at the same time it's always helpful to be able to size it up and take him without damaging the meat if you can. Anyway, that's my big tips on abalone diving for trophy diving. I'm sure there are a lot of other things, but those are the major ones that I can think of. Thanks.